Good evening, everyone. This is Shane Gebauer with Brushy Mountain Bee Farm. I'm the general manager here. I'd like to welcome you all this evening. Tonight's topic, getting started in beekeeping, is really geared toward the beekeeper or the person, rather, that is interested in becoming a beekeeper, but really is sort of seeking information about what it's going to take. This time of year, we get a lot of people that express interest in beekeeping, aren't really sure of time commitment, what equipment to get, and sort of the broad sense of what it is to be a beekeeper. This is not going to be sort of the meat and potatoes getting started in beekeeping. In other words, it's not going to be the details of how to install a package or the details about how equipment sort of relates to each other and how to utilize certain pieces of equipment. This is more a general conversation of what it is to be a beekeeper, how to get started into it. So I just wanted to set that expectation right from the onset. I tried to make it clear in the description that I sent out, but just so that we're all aware, it's really geared toward the person that's not quite a beekeeper yet, but is interested in perhaps delving into the hobby. So let's talk a little bit about what it is to be a beekeeper and how to get started into it. The first thing that we need to talk about are some of the essentials. We need to talk about some information. This is sort of a general outline for this evening. We need to talk about some information on how to keep bees, where to get that information. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of how to keep bees, but rather where you can go to get information, because beekeeping, frankly, it's one of those things that is very unfamiliar to most people. It's not like raising a puppy where you've got neighbors or family members or something like that may have had a dog, or you may have even had one growing up. Beekeeping is very unfamiliar to most people, and so finding information often is one of the biggest challenges, and I'm going to help you with that this evening. We're going to talk briefly about the bees. Again, it's not the details of how to install these bees, but rather how do you get the bees? Where can you get the bees? Things such as that. The equipment, the basic equipment that you might need for starting up, and then a little bit about location. Do you have a good location to put this colony? Because that's something you really want to consider before you get into this. So let's first talk about where you can go for some information. You can attend a class or join a bee association. Believe it or not, chances are there is a bee association around the corner from you. There is a network of associations across the U.S. and across many of the countries in the world, Canada, Europe, etc., that have regular meetings, offer classes that you can participate in. Nowadays, things are going online, such as this presentation this evening. We offer an online class that you can sign up that is about the meat and potatoes of keeping bees. But joining an association really can be a valuable resource. Oftentimes, these associations have mentors. You can go and help this person work their hive. They may come and help you work your hive once you get started. These are valuable resources. These are people you can turn to in a pinch and say, my colony is doing this. Is this normal? Or what should I do in this particular situation? Mentors are extremely useful to have in your life. The other thing is, too, there's a big leap. There's a big difference between sort of thinking about opening a beehive with perhaps 60,000 bees in there and actually doing it. I remember when I first got started in beekeeping, I was thinking, oh, opening up a hive of bees, no, that's not going to be much of a problem. We'll go through this, no problem. And then I remember it was for a commercial beekeeper, and we were harvesting honey, and I remember looking up into the sky as I'm carrying these big, heavy supers full of honey to the truck, and literally there are hundreds of thousands of bees flying around, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Of course, nothing happened. I was quite safe. I don't even recall if I ever got stung during that process, but it can be very daunting, very surreal experience. And so sort of thinking about doing that and actually doing it are worlds apart. And so that's where this mentor can really help. They can sort of ease you into it. They can let you stand back 10 feet as they open up their hive, and you can slowly approach as your comfort level increases. And I think you'll find that as you approach that colony and as you begin to get into the bees, they're much less intimidating than perhaps you might think. But still, that first experience into a beehive can be a rather daunting and a rather intimidating experience, and having someone that's done that before by your side is really an asset to you. It will make your experience that much better, and an association can help you with that. You can read books. The Backyard Beekeeper that I've got pictured here, this is actually an outdated picture. It's been released in a new edition just this year. Added a section on urban beekeeping. This is a great book. I really enjoy this book because it's written by Kim Flodham, who writes Bee Culture magazine, which is pictured just to the left there. And Kim is an excellent writer. He's a beekeeper himself. And it may surprise you, but a lot of writers out there are actually not beekeepers. Kim is not one of those. He keeps bees and he writes about them. And this book takes you start to finish. It offers recipes. It offers tons of tips. It talks about cooking with honey. It talks about everything related to beekeeping. It's a wonderful book. Magazines, for people getting started, I really like Bee Culture. Bee Culture magazine tends to be more practical, hands-on type of articles. Information that you can take from this magazine and apply it directly to your beekeeping in your backyard. There's another magazine called American Bee Journal. That tends to be a little bit more, I don't want to say scientific, but it tends to be a little bit more geared toward the commercial beekeeper, toward someone that's been doing it a while, someone that is perhaps in a, well, I guess for lack of a better description, maybe a little heady, someone that's looking for that more advanced information, which is fine. It's good information to have, but for people just getting started, I think Bee Culture tends to be geared towards those individuals a little bit better. So information, we need to get information, and association and books and magazines are excellent, excellent resources you can turn to. Another question that we get quite a bit this time of year is, what's my time commitment? I'm a busy man, I'm a busy woman, I work, I've got a family, we've got sports, this and that. What can I expect in terms of a time commitment? And this is a Kim Flodham quote: more than a cat, less than a dog. And that's, I actually ran that quote past a beekeeper that works here for us, and she said, yeah, that's about right. And here's some general guidelines in terms of visits to the hive. Of course, it's going to vary quite a bit by season. This time of year, in the middle of winter, you're not doing a whole lot of beekeeping. But you might still go to that hive on that winter thaw, that January thaw day when it hits 50 degrees, the sun is shining, and you might want to just crack the lid a little bit and see, maybe you're feeding them, and you want to see if there's still syrup available in their feeder. But you're not doing extensive hive manipulations here. You're just sort of checking in with them. Maybe it's a colder day and all you're going to do is just knock on the hive and listen for their hum coming from the inside, because bees don't hibernate. They don't go dormant. They remain active all winter long. And so if you knock on their hive, even on a 20-degree day, you'll hear them sort of roar up in a buzz saying, hey, what's going on out there? And they'll answer back to that knock. So you might go once a month in winter time. Spring, of course, that's when things are flowing. That's when things are blooming. That's when trees are in full bloom and all your woodland flowers are going to town. And also it's when your colony is trying to grow. It's trying to recover from that long, cold winter, and the colony sort of lost some bee numbers. And the queen now is rearing new bees or laying new eggs, and the colony is raising new bees after winter. And so you might want to check a little more frequently, maybe once a week. to go in and make sure your queen's laying properly, make sure they've got space, that they're not getting too crowded and running out of resources because the colony is growing so well and so fast, and they're bringing in such quantities of nectar that you've got to add extra pieces of equipment. So you want to stay on top of things a little bit more in spring, so maybe a visit once a week. Summer and fall, it sort of tapers off a little bit. Not quite as much blooming out there, so they're not bringing in nectar quite as quickly. Of course, this varies too based on where you are. So you might not need to go there quite as frequently. And the same with fall. You might just need to check in once every few weeks to make sure that they're healthy, apply medications, whatever it is you're doing for treatments, things like that. So just once every few weeks in summer and fall. Now, of course, the time per visit, and this varies based on how many hives you've got. There's sort of an efficiency that occurs as you add more hives. So your time per visit, rather, may be only a few minutes. Again, if it's winter time, if it's this time of year, it's literally just seconds. Walking up to the hive, giving it a knock, listening for the roar to make sure everything's okay in there, and walking away. So that's just a few minutes. But then again, if it's spring or fall or something, and you're trying to requeen your colony, you're going to have to spend a little bit more time there. You're going to have to spend you're going to have to put in some work looking through all those frames, trying to find that queen, and that can take some time. So it might be up to an hour trying to locate her. It all depends a little bit on your activity. But here are some general guidelines. Here are some general rules of thumb as to what it's going to take in terms of your time out of your schedule. And there's lots of ways to, as you learn about sort of, again, the meat and potatoes of beekeeping, the more detailed aspect of it, there's ways that you can sort of save time and not cut corners, but do things a little bit more efficiently and work it into your schedule. So that's the time commitment aspect of beekeeping. Let's move on now to the bees and talk about the bees. There's really three ways that you can acquire bees for your colony, for your equipment. There's what we call a nuke, or a nucleus hive, or a package of bees, which is what's pictured there on the left. That's a person installing a package of bees. There's about 12,000 bees in that package. Or a wild swarm, which is pictured on the right side. Now, for people just getting started, a wild swarm probably is not your best option. It certainly is the least expensive. However, if you're making the investment on equipment, the last thing you would want and would be rather discouraged by is making the investment on that equipment and then hoping that you caught a swarm or had someone call you and that you can go and catch that swarm, only not to have it happen. So you'd want to have a sure supply of bees, because that would be rather discouraging, having this equipment sitting there empty. And plus, if you're just getting started, it can be somewhat of a challenge to catch a swarm. There's a little bit of trickery that needs to occur to convince, so to speak, that swarm of bees to stay in your equipment. And so for someone just getting started, you don't necessarily need or want that added level of frustration and anxiety. So I would advocate either nucleus hives or packages. Now, packages are probably the most common method. Because they're self-contained. There's a package that you can see. The queen is in there, which is nice. The queen comes in her separate cage. You know exactly where she is in there. And there are places that will ship these to you through the mail. I strongly discourage people to do mail order packages. And here's why. Imagine you're a postal carrier. Imagine you're someone that has a bit of fear of stinging insects. And now here comes this package of bees, roaring with buzzing bees, coming through your mail stream. How are you going to treat that package? Is it going to get buried in the back of your vehicle underneath all the other boxes, thinking you'll be safer because it's buried? Or is it going to be handled properly, those bees well ventilated, sitting upright so that syrup doesn't drain out of a can that's in there, that's their food source, and delivered safely to you? It may turn out that things arrive just fine. But then again, it may turn out that your bees arrive alive, but they've really been stressed because they've been sitting in some hot vehicles, traveling across the country, who knows what. So I really encourage people to find a local source of bees. We sell bees. You can come pick them up from us. If you can't get to us, find a local source. This is, again, another reason to network with your local association. Oftentimes, there's some really experienced beekeepers in that association that are making a trip to a bee supply company and hauling these packages directly from that supplier back to a pickup location where all the association members are picking up their bees. And that is a much, much better way to go than having them shipped through the mail. And if you don't have someone that is doing that, oftentimes there's someone producing a nucleus hive. And what is a nucleus hive? Basically, it's a small colony of bees. They're not in a package like you see there. They're actively drawing out beeswax comb. There's going to be some honey in there. They're going to be raising bees, baby bees. The queen's going to be walking around. And that's a great way to go. I prefer packages for people just getting started because you know exactly where your queen is. She's in a separate cage. So that's basically how you can secure bees. The thing that folks often run into is they wait too long. There's a finite number of bees out there, and it's not like you can just run to the local ag store and pick up another package of bees. They're sold only in the springtime, and generally speaking, almost every company I know that sells bees sells out. And so you want to plan ahead. You want to start early. We started taking orders in February the 1st, and we started taking at 8:30 in the morning, and by 10:30 we had sold out of our first shipment. And so that gives you some idea. In 2 hours, we sold out of our first shipment. That gives you some idea of how much demand there are for these. And again, you don't necessarily have to get them from us. Try and find them from a local source, but start that process early. Again, the last thing you would want is to purchase equipment to put bees in only to find out that you don't have a source for your bees. If you can't find someone in association, try your local extension agent. Oftentimes, they will be informed by a fire department or the police department of wild swarms. Again, it's not the ideal, but if you've missed out on packages, missed out on nukes, it is an option. Contact them. They also might be able to point you in the direction of someone selling nucleus hives or packages. So that's another resource to turn to. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the equipment. By far, the best way to get started, if you don't have anything, the best way to get started is with a beginner's kit. It gives you everything you need to get started. This is a picture of our beginner's kit. This is our what we call our English garden hive, and then this is just a 10-frame hive with one box right here. It comes with some basic protective clothing. You can see the book. It comes with the smoker, gloves. This is the most economical way to get started, and that's all it really does. It really just gets you started. It provides you the equipment necessary to install a colony of bees, whether it be from a package or a nucleus hive or a wild swarm, and it gives you the basic equipment to maintain that colony of bees. However, you may want to pick up some additional things. Some people want to feel a little bit more secure and get a full-fledged bee suit. And my rule of thumb with protective bee clothing is you should wear whatever you feel comfortable wearing going into a hive of bees. You know, a lot of times you'll see people, even actually back in that one of those previous slides, the person installing the package of bees, they weren't wearing any gloves. If we zoomed out, you'd see they weren't wearing any veil either. And that's fine. That's what that person is comfortable with. That's what they're comfortable wearing and working that package of bees. But that does not mean that you have to do the same. You should wear whatever you feel comfortable wearing to get into that colony of bees. And the reason for that is if a bee lands on you and you're uncomfortable with that and jerk your hand away, that's going to agitate them. So if you need to be the Michelin man with duct tape around your ankles and wrists to seal everything up, by golly, that's what you should do. And with time, again, I think you'll find that that these bees are much more docile than Hollywood likes to portray them. And with time, you can slowly begin to lose some of that protective clothing. When I first started, I used to wear Carhartt pants, and which are nice, thick, heavy, sort of canvas type pants, and a full jacket and gloves. And now most days when I work my bees at home, I wear a veil just to protect my face. But I'm normally in t-shirt and shorts with my Teva sandals on. But it took me a while to sort of progress to that comfort level. And you'll get there too. And if you don't, that's okay too. But you should be comfortable around your bees because you'll have a more pleasant experience. You might need some extra brood chambers and supers and feeders and queen excluders and escape boards for harvesting. You might need some extracting equipment and bottles and lids if you're doing comb honey. Again, we're not going to get into sort of the details of what these are, but you may pick up a couple extra pieces of equipment depending on what your mentor suggests. And there's a lot of different ways to do bees out there, and someone may suggest using a queen excluder, some may not. And it all depends on what your management is, and so you might need to pick up some of these other things. But really what it comes down to is what's it going to cost you to get started? What's the startup cost? And for that basic setup, that basic beginner kit that I showed you, a 10-frame kit's about $140. That English garden hive kit's about $185. So that's what you're looking as to get started with one colony. Now, if you wanted to add an additional hive, an additional colony, it's gonna cost only about $60 to $110. And again, there's a lot of variation because it depends on how fancy you want it. This hive right here with the copper top is at the 110 level. This one right here is I think it worked out, it's about $65 or $70, and then if you get, there's another one that's a medium that's a little bit less expensive. Now, I do encourage people, if they can afford it, because there's no doubt about it, that's a lot of money, but if they can afford it, start with 2 colonies, and here's why. If you have 2 colonies in your backyard and one of them is doing something that you just think is a little strange, you've got that other colony there as something to compare it against. So how would you know that one colony is doing something strange if you had nothing to compare it to? But with 2 side by side, if one is doing something vastly different from the other, that may raise a flag for you. And you may want to call your mentor and say, hey, I've got one colony doing this and the other one's not. What's up with that? And so it gives you a sense of comparison, and also it allows you to sort of interchange equipment a little bit that helps those colonies. Maybe you were working your colony and you I don't know, maybe you pinched off the queen. The queen was killed off for some reason, and now so you had to put a new queen in there, but now that colony is weak. You can take some bees from your other colony and sort of boost up the population of the one that you had to requeen. So having 2 colonies is a really good thing if you can. And now again, the bees. Let's talk about the bees. You've got, because the basic setup that I've got up there, the 140 to 185, that does not include the bees. Bees can range from $0 if you're catching a swarm to, if you're buying nucleus hives, they can be up to about $120. We're selling a package of bees for $70, and that gives you enough to start 1 colony of bees. And so you're looking at about, $70, $80, depending on where you're getting them from. Some other places I've seen as high as $90 for a package of bees. So you're sort of in that range for a package of bees. And then, as I mentioned, you may need some other things. You may need an additional super, and a super is just where they're going to put the honey. And that, with the frames and foundation, basically a complete super, you'd be looking at about $25 for that. If you want an extractor, which you can see right here, this is our one of our basic extractors. This one actually is a little bit more than the $275, but we have one that's very similar to this. It's $275. But you don't need one if you produce comb honey. You can produce honey that's you harvest right out of the hive and keep it right in the wax that the bees store that honey, and you don't even need an extractor. There are people, my father, this is sort of embarrassing that I didn't supply my father with an extractor until just recently, but he would uncap the frames just using a regular, I think he was using just like a bread knife. He would slice the cappings off the frames and just sort of leave it on a tray and let the honey naturally drain out. It was a slow, long process, but he didn't have the extractor, and it saved him some money. So there's lots of ways, again, not that you're cutting corners, but there's just a lot of different ways to do things, a lot of different ways to get by. Now, the one thing, too, I want to emphasize here is sort of the return on investment. That's the really nice thing about beekeeping, is that you can actually get something back from this. You can sell your honey. Right now, well, I forget what it is, but I think the average retail price for a pound of honey is somewhere between $3 and $4. If you get, depending on where you are, you could get anywhere from maybe 60 to 150 pounds. Of course, you might not get any because it's agriculture, and last year was a terrible year for honey. But you can get some of this money back. You also get increased yield from your garden if you're a gardener. I remember when I first started, I was flabbergasted by the increased productivity of our garden. And for the longest time, I just thought, oh, it's just coincidence. But, you know, as I talk to people, again, the beekeeper here, I was talking to her tonight, she's like, I got the same thing. The same thing happened to me. And thankfully now her blueberry bushes are well pollinated, and she usually brings me a little bag every year for my son. So that's a nice thing too. So you've got this return on investment. They'll increase your garden yield. You can sell the honey. You'll get some beeswax. You can make some candles. So there is a bit of return, not to mention just the pure pleasure of it. And it really is a pleasurable hobby. There's something very, very mystifying and enchanting about watching a colony of bees come and go from their hive. It's really quite a meditative experience. Let's talk a little bit about location, where to put a colony of bees, and some things you want to consider if you're going to get a colony of bees, because there's a lot of, well, let me back up. There was just recently someone emailed me and said that their husband had gotten them a colony, a hive, not a colony of bees, but the equipment to put the bees in for Christmas, only to find out that they're in an urban area, and they found out that their zoning regulations prohibited beekeeping. So you want to look into that. If you're in an area if you're in town, if you're in a urban area, you want to contact your local zoning officer and find out, is beekeeping allowed? Now, here's the thing. Most places don't specifically state whether bees are or are not allowed. And so a lot of times they'll just say, oh gosh, no, why would we want those stinging insects? Those are going to be a nuisance. Those are going to be a hazard to your neighbors. And so they, without actually looking at the details of the zoning regulations. So go and do a little bit of research. A lot of times this information is online nowadays for your local town or municipality. You can research it there. You can go to the zoning office and ask for information. But generally speaking, the places that outright prohibit beekeeping are few and far between. There may be some restrictions saying, the hive has to be so many feet from a property line or so many feet from a dwelling. There may be some regulations there, but you want to find this information out before you jump in and are discouraged after the fact. And the good neighbor policy, there's a lot of different schools of thought out there as to how to handle neighbors if you're in a urban area. Should you or should you not tell them? Generally speaking, if the hive is out of sight from your neighbor's house, they're never going to know. But I often do suggest the good neighbor policy and let them know beforehand. And bribery with honey is a powerful, powerful weapon. And offering that up at the end of a season can really go over well with your neighbor and smooth some tensions that may exist. There's a great story that someone once told me that maybe it's urban legend, I'm not sure, but there was a beekeeper that had hives in his backyard, and his neighbor was complaining terribly, saying, "Your bees are terrorizing my children. They can't go out and play. They keep getting stung. And I'm going to, hire an attorney and sue you and everything else." And so this went back and forth. Of course, the beekeeper was within his right to have the bees, but it went back and forth, and he finally got so discouraged that he thought, well, he'll teach this guy a lesson. So he moved all the bees out under the cover of darkness, but set up hives, empty equipment in their place, so it looked like they were still there. And what do you know? The neighbor kept complaining even after those bees were long gone, and one day he finally threw his arms up in disgust after having a conversation with his neighbor and went there and kicked over the hives. Well, you could imagine the neighbor's embarrassment when they saw the equipment was actually empty. But that just illustrates that a lot of folks out there just, and it is difficult, but they're not able to discriminate between a honeybee and a yellow jacket. It is difficult, and all stinging insects look the same and are the same in a lot of people's minds, and so there's that perception that needs to be worked on, and that's where a good neighbor policy can come into play. Aspect, which direction do you want the bees? What's important in terms of sun, shade, etc.? If you can, have them east or south facing is ideal, but this is an ideal. It's not necessarily required, but it is better if you can have them facing east or south. That way the morning sun sort of hits the hives, gets them warming up. You'll want to have a water source, and this is really important if you're in an urban area. If you're out in the country, there's water everywhere, whether you know it or not. They will find it. But if you're in an urban area with swimming pools, there's something about that aqua color that really draw bees in. And so you'll want to provide a water source. And in many cases, it could just be something as simple as a bird feeder. As long as you don't let it dry up, that will be an acceptable water source. What you see right here in this picture is actually a carved out piece of rock that was given to my wife and I as a bird bath. That was it's a wedding present. And I just keep it filled with water. And you can see these ladies were quite thirsty one day, and they're huddled up shoulder to shoulder there drinking their water. And this is right near the hive. It's the first water they found, and so they've trained themselves to come right to this water source. It's also worth noting that this is only about 10 feet from my primary entrance at the house. Again, just sort of illustrating how docile these insects really are and how they do really like to keep to themselves. Exposed versus shelter. Obviously, you don't want them sitting out in the middle of a windswept field, but then again, you don't want them tucked right into some shrubbery as a windbreak. You want them to get a little bit of sun, a little bit of shade. If you're in the deep south where it can get quite hot, isn't a bad thing. Afternoon shade so the hive doesn't get too hot. These are just some general guidelines. Again, it's not absolutely required to have all of these conditions, but just some things you want to consider. And availability of resources. Generally speaking, even in the most dense cities, there are sufficient resources for honeybees. There are people keeping honeybees in New York City, in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, Atlanta, in San Francisco, Los Angeles. There are bees being kept in these really densely populated areas, and they are still able to find sufficient resources. Actually, these are some really good places to keep bees because of all the window boxes, the public parks, and the tree plantings along the street, some of the side streets and things like that really afford some good resources for these bees. But that's something you want to consider, that the bees are going to have sufficient resources. But generally speaking, no matter where you are, these bees will find what they need to survive. And some places will be a little bit better than others, but they will still find what they need to survive. Here's just sort of an illustration of some of the ideal conditions versus poor location. You've got a windbreak here with the trees. You've got easy access with a road. You've got some water over here. It's easy to carry the equipment from the hives to your vehicle or maybe to your house if your house is over here. As opposed to this situation here where they're down in a floodplain, the hives are going to be damp. They may even flood and wash away. It's down low, so you're going to get this sort of pooling of damp, cool air down here where the hives are. Plus, when you have to haul heavy equipment, you've got to haul it uphill to your car or where your house is. So this is not necessarily the ideal conditions, but if it's all you've got, then you've got to work with it. But just be aware, you know, what might happen where this colony is being placed. Is it going to flood? That would be my biggest concern with something like this. But otherwise, if that's what you've got, that's what you've got. So these are just some general guidelines, some general things to think about when siting your hive and where you should and should not place it. And then, of course, for information, additional information, please feel free to contact us. We've got our website. We've implemented this live chat. This is a screenshot. It's not our actual website, so we're not here to chat. We're offline right now. But we've got our resource section, and I will go to our live site now. There we go. So you can see it. We've got our resource section. And it's probably going to run a little slow because I'm doing the webinar, but we've got some information about getting started. We put up some news and events, information about disease and pests, and all these webinars are posted in our video library. We've got some links. Here's the link. There's a link right here to bee associations, which opens up this page right here. This is Bee Culture Magazine, and you can see it's organized by state. If we go to North Carolina, which is where we're located, you can see all the bee associations that bee culture is aware of. So there could even be more that are not listed here, but these are associations that that bee culture is aware of. You can find the one closest to you. Many of them, as you can see, have websites and emails or phone numbers. Some of this may be a little bit outdated, but chances are if you called up one of these folks and they weren't necessarily the contact anymore, they would be able to tell you who to get in touch with. So this Bee Culture website, which is accessible through ours, is a great asset and can help you find folks nearby. With that's pretty much everything that I wanted to get through. So what I'm going to do now is turn to my questions panel here and see what folks have questions on, and I'll do my best to go through them. I've got plenty of time here, so I'll do my best to answer them. Let me just screen them. Okay. All right. Someone's just asking if we have packages left on the later shipments. Yes, we do. We still have a package for our last shipment. Our first two have sold out at this point. We also have a pickup in Pennsylvania, in New Columbia, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Lewisburg, right off of the I-80 corridor. That you can pick up packages there as well. Are all the hive body supers, etc., the same size outside dimension? So all parts will fit together. Well, there's two basic sizes. There's what we call a 10 frame. Creatively enough, will hold 10 frames, and an 8 frame, which again, creatively holds 8. The outside dimensions of those two are different, so those are not interchangeable. But within those, they are all the same. A high body, a super, will have the same outside dimension. An 8 frame high body will have the same outside dimension as an 8 frame medium super. Does the $70 include the does the $70 cost of a package include the queen? Yes, it does. The queens that come with with our packages, and most packages that are available out there come with a mated queen. So she will be in that cage, in a separate cage inside that package, and she will have already been mated. There's a process of releasing her into that colony that, again, we're not going to get into the details of that, sorry, I lost track there. There's a process to release her into that colony, and that will introduce her, and with time she will begin to lay, but she will not have to go out on a mating flight to mate. She will already be mated, but it usually takes her a day or two to get up and running, even though she's already mated. Let's see. Here, this person has 5 cats and a dog. Will the bees need to be fenced from them? Not necessarily. I suspect that the first time a dog goes and sniffs the entrance and the bees get perhaps a little defensive, that dog will be trained fairly quickly not to do that. But I haven't heard of any problems. We had a dog for the longest time, and she never messed with the bees at all. Unless she happened to be laying in the grass and one was sort of cruising along looking for a clover blossom and got a little too close, she would sort of snap at it just the way a dog would snap at a fly or something like that, but it was never an issue. Low-lying areas, risk of fungus. If it's a low-lying area, like in that illustration where moisture can sort of collect and pool, it will increase the likelihood of certain diseases. There's something called chalk brood, which is a fungal disease, and we see a higher outbreak rate in areas that have high moisture content. But still, the bees are amazingly good at regulating their environment. They've done studies where they've put a colony of bees on a black lava flow in Italy, and the external temperature was, I think, 150 or 160 degrees, but the bees maintain the internal temperature of their hive at about 95 degrees through the evaporation of water. So they're very, very good about regulating their environment, but the less regulating they have to do, the more they can focus on other things like raising new bees, baby bees, collecting nectar, foraging for pollen, things like that. Do you recommend marked queens? I do. You know, for an extra $2, it's worth it. It makes it that much easier to see her. And the thing is, when people first get started in beekeeping, even when you've been doing it for a while, it's always nice to see that queen. It's always nice to find her. And having that marked queen makes it that much easier. But really, you don't need to see her to know she's there. There's cues that you can pick up on, and you'll learn this with time, and as you talk to people, there's cues that tell you whether she's present or not. So you don't need to see her, but it is very nice to have her marked, because if you're working a colony of bees, you know, you do want to do a quick inspection of a frame to make sure your queen's not on there before perhaps you set it on the ground to create some space to work the rest of the hive. You don't want to set your queen outside of the hive. So having her marked makes it much easier to find her in those situations. So for an extra $2, it is worth doing, yeah. What if you don't take the honey each year? You will, depending on where you are, chances are you will have to remove some honey. Otherwise, what will happen is the colony will get what we call honey bound, which basically they can bring in so much honey that they use up all their available space. And that creates something called, creates conditions for something we call swarming, which is where that colony naturally tries to divide itself and leave to find a new home. And so you will need to do some sort of hive manipulations to make sure they have space. And taking honey is one of those things to do to create the space. What is the impact of mowing around the area where you place the hives? Generally speaking, it's not an issue. I mow. I've got a riding tractor, and I mow basically within a foot of my entrance with that riding mower. I just cruise right in front of them. I just make sure that the blow off of the mower is not into the hive, because that really ticks them off. They don't like to have grass clippings come flying into the entrance of their hive. So make sure the exhaust of your mower deck is blowing away. But there are times where your bees might get a little more agitated. I once worked a colony of bees the day after a hailstorm, and I have never encountered bees that were so ornery as to that colony. They just were up all night being peppered with hailstones, and they were on edge. So little things like that you might not even consider can sort of create conditions where your hive might be a little less desirable to work, and you'll pick those things up with time. You don't want to work them on a cloudy, overcast day or rainy day. They get a little ornery then. They're just like us. They like the nice sunny weather. They like it when food's abundant. They're happy with life, and they're going to be happy happy to see you when you come and visit them. But if you've had a week of rain and dreary weather and you get some sun and you go there, they might be a little ornery. They get a little cabin fever. So, these sorts of things are things you'll want to consider, and you'll learn with time. What are your thoughts on plastic hives? Plastic, the ones that I've seen are really quite heavy. I assume you're actually talking about plastic and not the polystyrene. The plastic ones are really quite heavy. And the plastic conducts the cold a little bit more readily than wood or the polystyrene would. So I'm not real too keen on the plastic. Polystyrene's okay, but it's really, really fragile, and you really have to be careful with how you handle it. Are you going to offer classes at the Pennsylvania site? Not this year, perhaps in the future. We'll get to that, but not this year. This is the first year they've been open, and so we're sort of easing things in. They're doing a wonderful job with what they're doing up there right now, and I see it happening in the future, but not this year. Is the Pennsylvania store open every day? Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. We're not open on weekends, neither here nor there, but they are open 8:30 to 5 every day. I know Jim Wilson, the manager up there. He's in the past. They haven't been there that long, but still, he's made accommodations to work with people, either sort of tuck an order around a corner of the building or something like that if the weather's good, and so you can give him a call and we'll work with you any way we can. What are the various breeds of bees? That's a really great question. That's a good question that we get asked a lot. And I actually probably should have incorporated that into the talk this evening. There are lots of different breeds of bees. There's the Russian bees. There's Italian. There's New World Carniolan. There's Buckfast. There's Caucasian. There are the Minnesota Hygienics that have sort of surfaced as almost their own breed. And which one works best is going to vary a little bit depending on where you're located. But for people just getting started, I either like the Italians, which are a very nice bee, a gentle bee. They're prolific. They grow a colony very well, which is what you want for just starting up a colony. Or Carniolans. I've had some fantastic luck with the New World Carniolans. And that one's actually my bee of choice. They're very docile. They conserve resources when resources aren't readily available in nature. They overwinter well. They're fairly good producers of honey. Those are the ones that I like. But for people just getting started, an Italian bee is probably the way to go because they'll build your colony much quicker. The packages that we sell come with a queen that is I guess I can say, sort of Italian-esque, if you will. The primary genes are Italian, but frankly, the breeder that's breeding those queens is more concerned with quality rather than maintaining a pure breed Italian queen. And so he introduces a lot of genetics from Carniolans, from the Russians, and some of those other races that I mentioned, to get good genetic diversity and incorporate characteristics that he wants to see in his bees. He wants to see good overwintering. He wants to see good honey production. He wants to see disease resistance, as well as gentleness. And that's what I like. I've got a 2.5-year-old and now a newborn. And the last thing I want is for them to be playing outside, or my wife to be outside with them and having to deal with bees that if they get a little too close to the hive, come out to greet them. So I want good, gentle bees, and that's what this person selects for. Is the pickup point in PA both in New Columbia? Yes, the pickup dates for Pennsylvania are in New Columbia, and again, that's I can show you real quick where that. Scoot that screen out of there. Let me go. We've got, for those of you that are interested, on our website, if you click on the Contact Us page, here you can see their address. If you go to the driving directions, it'll open up a map, and it'll give you, it'll give both of our locations here over on this side, and this is where they are in Pennsylvania. And I can just zoom out here a little bit. And you can get a sense of their location. So I-80, here's Williamsport, Harrisburg is right down here, 81. They're pretty much right smack dab in the center of the state. So it's fairly convenient for folks. Oops, there we go. Get back to my questions. Okay, to lift into, okay, carrying active hives possible for one person to lift to a new area. An active colony, depending on the time of year, can be really quite heavy, and I would not suggest doing it by yourself. I'd recruit someone, but I'd also suggest recruit someone that's a beekeeper. I once, when I was getting married, had to move some hives out of my backyard, and because that's where the ceremony was going to be, and I recruited someone that was not a beekeeper, and well, needless to say, it didn't go very well. So find a fellow beekeeper to help you out. Let's see. How do you move hives? Shoot me an email, and I'll give you some general pointers. That's something that's probably a little bit more detailed than what I'd like to cover right here. What's the best finish for a garden hive? Paint or stain and varnish? Francis, that's really up to you. You can do either, and that's another question that we get quite often. What color do I have to paint my hive white? Well, no. White is just one of those things that sort of become or was a standard, but really has no meaning from the bee's perspective. Obviously, if you're in the deep south, you don't want to paint your hive black, because that's just going to absorb that sun's heat and cook the bees. And so you want to choose colors wisely, but there's no fast rule that says you have to paint your hive white. There's no rule that says you have to paint it. But you should preserve it somehow, either with an exterior quality stain and varnish. There are, if you look at, I think it's the Getting Ready for Winter presentation on our webinars. There's the opening slide has some pictures of hives that are stained and varnished. So either work well. It's whatever you're most interested in doing. The garden hive, that cypress wood, really is a beautiful wood and does very well with stains and varnishes. Looks really nice. How much honey will you generally get from one hive in one season? Here's the thing: when you first get started, you're not going to get a whole lot of honey, because it takes about 8 pounds of honey for those bees to produce 1 pound of wax. And when you're first starting out, they've got a tremendous amount of wax building to do. And so all those resources are going into sort of growing the hive, also growing their numbers, which are going to increase their resource needs. So your first season, your first year, you might not get much. Generally speaking, though, you do get a little bit. And how much you get per hive varies a great deal as to where you're located. Here where we are, if we get 60 pounds a year, that's probably a pretty good year off of one colony. If you're up north, you can easily get 100 pounds per hive. And in a good year, several hundred pounds per hive. So a little bit in terms of weather, it depends on weather, but also where you're located and the resources available. We go through a tremendous what's called a dearth here in North Carolina after our sourwood bloom, which is in July, early July. After that, there's just not a whole lot going on in terms of nectar sources, and so we don't get a whole lot of fall honey. But up north, you get stuff like loosestrife. You get some Japanese bamboo, which is a little later. You get all that goldenrod and aster in the fall. There's a really good flow up in the north late in the season. So it depends a little bit on where you are. Is there a preference for the type of foundation for a beginner? That's a personal preference, Derek. I like the plastic just because I tend to be short on time. And this is sort of gets into sort of your time commitment and things like that, and sort of how you can cut corners a little bit. I'm always short on time. I'm traveling to meetings. I'm talking a lot. I'm on the road. And when I'm not, I like to spend time with the family. So my time's fairly limited. So I like the plastic because I take it out of a box, I put it in the hive, and the bees do their thing. If you've got some more time, you can go with a wood frame and a wax foundation, but you got to take the time to insert that wax foundation. Here's the thing. The wax foundation, the bees will work that more readily than the plastic. And so the plastic does much better up north or in areas where there's a good flow than it does in the south or areas where the flow isn't quite as strong. The wax foundation, what they do is there's enough wax on a sheet that the bees don't even really have to add wax to it. They can sort of re-sculpt and mold the existing wax in a sheet of foundation and begin to draw comb. Someone years ago took blue food coloring and mixed it in with some wax and made foundation with it. And what they found was the bees drew that foundation, created a comb, wax comb, from that foundation that was about half the distance of a cell. In other words, they took that existing wax and built that foundation halfway before they even had to add their wax onto it, the wax that they were producing onto that foundation. So wax foundation certainly will give your colony a leg up and get them going faster. But, you know, you've got the installation process. You've got, it is a fragile sheet of equipment, especially this time of year with cold temperatures. It will shatter if it gets too cold. We may even delay a shipment if the weather's too cold to ship it. We'll pack it as best we can, but it's really, really brittle in cold weather. So there's things like that that you'll have to consider. Pesticides in urban residential areas, contamination, hives, bees, etc. That's a good question, Miles. And you know, we had a webinar, an urban beekeeping webinar, and while we were offline, I was talking to the folks that were involved with that and asking them what they thought about that. You know, and one person pointed out that it's probably not all that much different. And here's why. There was a study done by a woman up in Pennsylvania, Penn State, that took samples of beeswax and tested it for pesticides. And she found that even in organic beekeeping operations, there were some pesticides in that wax. And so immediately you might think, well, what's that organic beekeeper doing? Well, it's not their fault. What happens is these bees will forage miles from their colony. And so if they're going to a field's edge that's growing a crop that's been treated with a pesticide, chances are there's a little bit of overspray. Or chances are when that farmer plows that field, some of the pesticide that might be in the soil will land on the blossoms adjacent to that field, and that's coming back to the colony. And so it's sort of discouraging, but it doesn't really matter where you are. You're going to get some contamination in your hive. And that's why it's really good to rotate out some of your frames and comb on a regular basis. I say about every 3 years, because it gets fresh, clean wax into your colony and gets rid of all that old contaminated stuff. And that will keep your hive healthier. So the difference in pesticides in a urban area versus a rural area, while it may be a different suite of pesticides, because maybe in an urban area you're dealing with someone that's treating dandelions in their driveway, as opposed to a rural area where you're dealing with something that a farmer's spraying on their crops, but you're still dealing with pesticides. And in fact, this woman was arguing, and it's a good point, that you might actually have less in an urban area because you don't have those agricultural pesticides. Chances are they're not spraying, people aren't spraying their flower boxes with a lot of chemicals to keep weeds out. They just go in and yank them. And so you might end up with less in an urban area as opposed to a rural area. That is just theoretical. I don't know for sure. I'm not sure if that woman that looked at pesticides in the wax segregated the samples based on urban versus rural. Can we have copies of the presentation? They'll be posted up in the resource section. This whole thing's being recorded. As far as water sources, my neighbor has a swimming pool in their backyard. Is it possible to keep them out? And in other words, can I train them to take water from another water source? Yes, you can. And the best thing to do is provide that water source before you even install your package or start your colony of bees, because they will go out, and bees, we say busy as a bee and they're industrious and all this other stuff, but really they're only going to do as much work as they have to. They're not going to fly, a couple 100 feet to your neighbor's swimming pool if there's a water source a few feet from their colony. And so give them that bird bath. Give them, go to your local farm supply store and pick up like a little chicken water feeder thing that you can put out there. Just make sure it doesn't go dry. And one of the tips from that urban beekeeping webinar we did was mix in a little mint into that water, and it entices them that much more to go to that water source rather than your neighbor's water source. But give it to them first, because once they find your neighbor's pool, it's difficult to then say, oh, don't go over there, stay here at my feeder. Give them your feeder first so they never even get trained on your neighbor's pool. How common, this person's in a suburban area, how common is swarming? Is it something I should eventually expect? Swarming is a natural, instinctual process in a bee's life, in a colony's life. A colony of bees, there's individual reproduction occurring inside that colony. Individual eggs are being laid and individual bees are emerging, but really that colony can be thought of as a single organism. And the only way for that single organism to reproduce is to swarm. So it is a natural, instinctual thing. Now that's, and it will, that instinct and the conditions may occur to sort of begin that process. And so you might not necessarily be able to prevent it, but you can do things to reduce the likelihood. Make sure you stay on top of the bees, and make sure you stay ahead of the colony by giving them space. If they start to get crowded, you can give them empty frames with new foundations, so they've got more space in there. Give them supers, empty supers to start filling with honey. You can temporarily split the hive, and all these are sort of more advanced type beekeeping things, but it's ways that you can reduce that likelihood. But chances are, at some point, they're going to get that itch to swarm. And you want to make sure you're there to do everything you can to reduce that tendency. What's the latest I can pick up bees as the snow melts late here in PA? Our last pickup date is May 8th. It's a Saturday. Our pickup dates are, all our pickup dates are on Saturdays. We're open from 9 to 2. On Saturdays. You can also pick up equipment on those days. We encourage you to place the order about a week ahead of time so we can get everything ready for you. Can I put bees in the same area pasture with dairy goats? The only problem with that, Sean, is I bet those dairy goats are going to love to jump on top of those hives if they're literally in the pasture with the goats. So I would probably fence them off and keep them a little bit removed because the bees will get agitated hearing all those hoof prints up on their rooftop. Let's see, is there still space available for your Saturday class? I believe so. We have a class here, I think it's March 13th. It's an all-day thing on a Saturday. I think we still have space, but I'd have to double check. If you give us a call tomorrow, we'll be able to help you out with that. I had a bee tree on my property in the fall. If they make it through winter, is it hard to get them into a hive? Joan, you'd have to cut the tree down, and you'd have to cut open the space that they're in and physically remove that comb. And most importantly, you'd have to get the queen. Otherwise, it would be all for naught. How soon do you need to add supers to your initial box for honey production? So I assume, Ron, you're talking about a new colony. You started a new colony, and when are you going to add a honey super on there? A lot depends on the availability of resources, weather. If you get weeks of rain, we had a terribly wet season last year. If you get prolonged periods of dreary, rainy weather that confine those bees to that colony and prevent them from getting out and getting resources they need, that will delay the onset of the growth of that colony, and of course will delay your need to add a honey super. So it's difficult to say. For an existing colony, that have comb drawn out and bees are going along, I'll probably be adding supers. I guess probably about March. Red maple will be coming on. I'll be getting some stuff ready for that. How many supers would be good to have on hand the first year for a new colony? Generally speaking, I say you'll need probably about 2 supers. But again, if it's a real gangbuster year, you might need 4. If it's last year, I'm not sure if any new beekeepers got honey last year. So it's, hit or miss, Tracy, but I would say 2 would be a good rule of thumb. So this person lost 2 colonies. How do they clean out the equipment? It depends a little bit on the condition of the equipment. A lot of times when bees die inside the hive, they get a little moldy and things like that. If the equipment's gotten sort of moldy, you might not be able to clean it. But if it's just if it hasn't gotten to that point, just simply scrape out some of the old dead bees. Make sure that they didn't die from any sort of disease like American foul brood that could be transmitted on to the next generation of bees that you put in there. But there's really no disinfection that needs to occur to the equipment. Just make sure all the old bees are cleaned out and you don't have any sort of mold issues from dampness inside that colony. What is your opinion of a queen excluder for a beginning beekeeper? So here's the deal with a queen excluder. A queen excluder is, for those of you who aren't aware, it goes on top of your brood chamber, and your brood chamber is where your queen is doing all her work. That's where she's laying her eggs and they're raising new bees. It goes on top of your brood chambers and underneath your honey supers. And what it does, a queen is sort of fat in the abdomen. And a queen excluder has wires that are spaced just right so that worker bees can pass right through it, but a queen is too fat to fit through. So it confines her down into the brood chamber, so you only end up with honey above that queen excluder. I really like queen excluders. You talk to beekeepers, 50% will say they're honey excluders that prevent the bees from going up into the super and reduce your honey flow. Others will, such as myself, say, nah, you're not. I've never really noticed any difference. But there's a trick to that. If you are a brand new beekeeper and you've just started out, you've got your brood chambers, the queen's doing her thing, the bees are growing, the colony's strong, you're ready to add a honey super now, but it's brand new equipment. I do not recommend putting a queen excluder on that colony at that point. And here's why. If you put that queen excluder on and a honey super that's brand new frames and foundation above it, that is not enough of a carrot dangled in front of those bees for them to pass through that queen excluder. Even though they might be crowded for space, they do not see that brand new equipment up there as being sufficient to go through that queen excluder. And so what will happen is they'll continue to get bound up down in the brood chamber and potentially swarm. So for a new beekeeper with new equipment, your brood chamber is full, you're ready to add your honey super, put that honey super on without that queen excluder. Let the bees have free passage up into that honey super. Let them begin to work those frames. Let them begin to draw that foundation out. Maybe the queen even goes up there and lays a few eggs. Maybe they start to put a little pollen up there to feed the developing bees that are now in your honey super. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. What you're doing is you're training them to go up into that equipment, and now you're giving them a reason to go up into that honey super because maybe there's brood up there. Bees, they will take care of their young like you would not believe. They will not neglect developing bees. So what you do is you sort of let them have free passage up there. They begin to go up. They begin to work that. Maybe the queen goes up there. Maybe she doesn't, but maybe they start to store honey there. Once they begin to work those frames a little bit, then slip your queen excluder in. Now they've sort of been trained to go up into that equipment, that new super, and they also know that there's something up there. And if there's developing bees up there, they will definitely pass readily through that queen excluder and get into that equipment to take care of those bees. And they'll also continue to draw out that comb, and field bees will continue to provide nectar to fill that honey super up. And what will happen is any brood that may have been laid up there or begin to develop up there will simply emerge out from those cells, and they'll just fill those now empty cells up with honey. And so you'd still end up with good, clean honey that doesn't have brood in it. Just make sure when you slip your queen excluder in there that you're not actually trapping your queen up in that honey super. So slip it in, go back a week later, and make sure you don't see any eggs in that honey super. If you still see eggs, your queen is upstairs. She's in that honey super, and you'll want to look for her to throw her down into the brood chambers. That's where having a marked queen will be handy. So that's a little bit more in depth than I was planning on doing, but that was a good question and something that people have a hard time with when they get started. Guinea fowl, will they eat the bees? I don't think so, but honestly, I don't have any experience with guinea hens. They're an interesting group. My brother-in-law had some of those. They were some of the best watchdogs I've ever met. I'm not sure how they would be around bees. Chickens aren't a problem, but guineas, I'm not sure. Let's see. If your supplier doesn't mark queens, can you mark them? Can you mark her yourself? Sure, you can. You just want to make sure that you get it right on the back of her thorax, which is that middle section of the bee. You don't want it to run onto her antennae or anything like that. And you want to make sure it dries quickly before you put her back into the box. Let's see. What should be done if a queen is found dead in the package? Seal up the package and call the supplier immediately. They'll get you a replacement. They should get you a replacement. We would get you a replacement one way or another. And so you want to contact the supplier. Here's what I found. I'm pulling this number out of the air. Maybe we'll say 95% of the time, when a queen is found dead in a package, that's not to say she's found dead 95% of the time, but when a queen is found dead in a package, about 95% of the time, it's because there is a queen running around free inside that package. So here's a little bit about how these packages are produced. Queens are reared in a completely separate area of the operation. So the queen that's in this cage is not from the same colony that all these worker bees are from. And that's why she's kept in her own separate cage, because they don't recognize her as their own. And that's why there sort of has to be this introduction process. So she's put in this cage and put inside the package. Well, you know, as you can imagine, as these companies are producing literally thousands of packages, sometimes a queen from the colony that they're shaking the bees from is missed, and that queen is actually shaken into a package. So in those cases, what happens is the bees inside that package know they've got a queen, and they know it's their queen. And so oftentimes they will attack the queen in the cage, and sometimes they can get to her and kill her. And that's what happens probably about 95% of the time. But still, it's risky to sort of go on that assumption and hope that there's a queen in there, only to be disappointed when you find out there's not, because you're in that 5% of the time where just something went wrong. And it is agriculture. You know, these things are sort of wild animals, and sometimes do things that are unpredictable. Let's see. Should I expect to have to medicate right off the bat? No, I don't recommend medication right off the bat. Regardless of medication, even if you're using some of what we call soft chemicals, these chemicals do provide a little bit of stress on the colony. And the last thing you want to do is stress a colony that you want to grow quickly. And a package is something that you want to grow quickly. It's also kind of a weak colony. But that's the nature of it. It'll grow given time, but you don't want to do anything that will sort of set them back and delay that growth. You want to keep it going. So I don't recommend treating right off the bat, but you might need to your first season, just not in the springtime when you install your new colony. With the English garden hive, do you recommend a deeper box for the brood chambers? No, I actually don't. I'm in the process. I've got a lot of older boxes and equipment that I've kept, picked up over the years, but I'm in the process of trying to switch everything over to, I'm trying to switch over to all medium boxes, which is what comes with the English garden hive. And that way, it makes it easier to rotate equipment because it's all the same size. All my frames will be the same size, all those medium frames. So I can take frames from my honey supers and put them down into my brood chambers and call out some of those old brood frames. Clean up those frames, put new foundation in it, and put those back into the honey supers. If you've got a deep box with medium on top, you can't do that. So I actually like going with all standardized equipment. I'm trying to get there, but it's an expense and things like that. It's just a matter of time. Let's see. What type of smoker material do I recommend? Pretty much you can use anything that will burn cleanly. You have to be careful with some baling twines now because they're treated with fungicides so they don't rot in hay mounds. You can use burlap, but that's becoming increasingly difficult to find because it's now all that plastic burlap, but the real burlap is good. Pine needles are great. We sell cotton fiber from cotton mills. Just about anything that will burn will work. Some smokes may aggravate the bees a little bit more than others. So if you're using something and you're finding your bees aren't responding favorable to it, switch it up. Try something different. I've used dried grass clippings with leaves, pine needles. I've got a wood shop in my garage, so I use wood shavings. Sawdust doesn't burn too well because it compacts too tightly. But wood shavings work well. Anything that will burn fairly cleanly that hasn't been treated with anything. Let's see. Which is better, bottom feeders or top feeders, or is it seasonal? I really prefer top feeders pretty much across the board. But generally speaking, they tend to be the more expensive type of feeder. But the nice thing is they're easy to get to. They're easy to fill. And depending on which one you're using, they all have their pros and cons, but generally speaking, top feeders are my preferred feeder. But that said, entrance feeders work well. You can easily see them without even opening up the colony. The division board feeders, I probably would steer away from those. You've got to get right down into the equipment to fill them up. They tend to have more drowning than any other type of feeder, but entrance feeders or top feeders. Top feeders would be my preference, but entrance feeders work just fine too. Ventilation. Could I touch on ventilation? Especially this time of year, people think they got to batten down the hatches and seal the hive up. It's cold out there. Bees are quite well adapted to cold weather. It's cold and moisture that is a deadly mix. It's just like us. You go outside on a day that's 40 degrees but raining, and what do we say? Oh, it's damp and raw out there. I'm chilled to the bone. It sort of bites through your clothing. You feel, you're just not comfortable, as opposed to a day when it might be 20 degrees, so a full 20 degrees colder, but the sun is shining, and it might be much more comfortable because the air is dry. The moisture doesn't wick the heat away from us, the heat isn't wicked away from us by the moisture. And so the same is true for bees. And bees do not hibernate. They don't go dormant. They're active all winter long. And so they're in that colony all winter long, breathing, expelling moisture. And so you want to be able to vent that out. I often take something about the thickness of a popsicle stick and prop up my inner cover so that moisture can vent out the back. I don't seal off my screen bottom boards in winter. I want some airflow through that colony so that that moisture gets expelled. And some people will say, well, you're in North Carolina. Your winters aren't that bad. I kept bees in upstate New York where it could hit -20. And I did the same thing up there. I propped my inner cover and I kept my screens open. You want to get rid of that moisture because, as this person's alluded to, it can create some mildew issues, some mold issues. It can create a lot of problems. So you want to get that moisture out of there. So ventilation is critical, especially in the winter. And then in the summertime, if you're in the south, you might want to consider a screened inner cover that allows excess heat to go out the top, so that the bees don't have to work quite as hard to cool that colony. So ventilation can be useful in both of those extremes. Let's see. So this person has, they're in a suburban setting. They want to put their hive in the backyard, and they've got a 6-foot fence. This is a really good point. Should my hive face the fence or my backyard? One of the best ways to sort of mask the presence of a colony in a populated area like that is to get those bees up high. And one of the best ways to do that is to point them at a fence. So what happens is they'll fly out. Of course, they can't fly through the fence. So what do? They go up. And now they're 6 foot over, so they're over most people's heads. And so that's a great way to get them up and out of people's way, is to point them at some sort of barrier that forces them to fly up. So you can do that, absolutely, and it might be good. Let's see here. Is there always a queen in a swarm? Not necessarily, but generally yes. Also, sometimes there might be what we call a secondary or tertiary swarm where a virgin queen has emerged out and actually swarmed. And so you might not be able to find that virgin queen quite as easily as a mated queen because her abdomen her reproductive organs haven't really developed quite extensively yet, or as thoroughly as a mated queen. And so her abdomen is smaller, and she can blend in a little easier with those worker bees. That said, you can still identify a virgin queen, but it's just a little bit harder because she does blend in just a little bit easier. Have you found the Russians are more aggressive? My whole thing is I don't refer to any honeybees as being aggressive. And here for those of you that are in an urban area and trying to convince your neighbors that beekeeping is a good thing, you don't ever want to use the word aggressive. And bees really aren't aggressive. They're just more defensive, which is sort of saying the same thing, but really it's quite true. Bees do not actively seek out a target to sting, which is really what aggression is. What they do is they defend what they consider theirs. So if you go to their hive, they will try and protect their resources, their honey and pollen that they've got there. And certain bees are more defensive in nature and have certain thresholds. It's sort of like people's personal space, right? I mean, some people will let you get closer to them than others. Bees are the same way. They sort of have a personal space. Some will let you get right into the hive with them. Others may meet you at the door, so to speak. And I have found Russians not to necessarily be more defensive in nature, but they tend to posture. You know, it's sort of like the person that puts up, you know, puffs up their chest and tries to put on a good show. They come out of the hive and they'll bump into your veil a little bit more and sort of let you know they're there. But generally speaking, I haven't found them more defensive in nature, but they do try and put on a good show. I would not recommend Russians for people just getting started. They tend to require a little bit different and a little bit more management than, say, an Italian or a Carniolan. Distance bees range from a hive. I think the greatest recorded is like 8 miles. Of course, it could be more than that. That's just what I've seen. But generally speaking, it's about 2 miles. Let's see. When you are outside and honeybees begin buzzing around you, can you tell whether they're just curious or if it's aggression? You can usually tell. They'll just sort of go about their business and sort of scoot along. You know, they're just looking for a flower to land on or tasty sweet. You can usually tell. They'll sort of bounce into you if they're trying to tell you you're too close or something, or you're someplace that they don't want you to be. They'll bump into you, so they'll let you know. How long in the summer should I feed them sugar water? If you're getting a new colony started, you should feed sugar water right up until the point you add honey supers. At that point, stop feeding. I once had a beginner beekeeper bring me honey in the fall that was just as clear could be, and what happened was they had fed sugar water all summer long and with honey supers on, and all they did was take that sugar water and store it in their honey supers. So they had sugar honey, sugar. It was basically corn syrup in their cells that they had harvested, and not honey at all. Let's see here. Let's see. Do you need to paint the plastic foundation with wax? You don't have to. It comes the stuff that we sell comes pre-waxed. Actually, we do sell unwaxed, which I would recommend painting with some wax. Certainly, even painting the waxed foundation with an additional layer of wax. Now, we're talking painting with wax here, not actual paint, just to clarify that. Painting a wax foundation with more wax doesn't hurt. Honeybee, this person lives out in the country, limited agriculture. Will they get enough pollen from trees and weeds? Absolutely. Not a problem. What about overwintering? Oh, what about new wax? Is it better than or worse than dark wax? After one season, that wax is good and dark. You know, there's a lot of beekeepers out there that pride themselves on using the same foundation that their great-great-great-grandfather used, and I don't subscribe to that type of management. That comb has undoubtedly been contaminated, perhaps with bee diseases, as well as perhaps some pesticides from the surrounding area. So new wax is not a problem. As long as they've got that wax drawn out and resources stored in it, that's not a problem. Let's see here. How do you keep water from freezing in winter? You don't really need to feed them water in winter as much as a corn syrup or sugar water. And the sugars are going to reduce the freezing. It may granulate, in which case, you know, I sort of slow the feeding down a little bit in winter. I like to keep a little on, so just in case we get that warm day, they can get up there, and even if it's granulated, they can work it a little bit. but I don't want to keep my feeder full because it just means I've got more cleaning to do come springtime. Let's see, recommended protection for bears. Electric fence before the colony goes in and bait it with bacon or sardines or anchovies or something like that while it's hot. What happens is the bear goes up, they go to sniff or lick, and they get zapped on their nose or tongue, which is extremely sensitive compared to their thick hide where they probably wouldn't even feel it. And if you train them before the colony is there, they usually leave it alone. But if the bear finds that colony and then you try and put up a fence, they know just how good it is on the other side, and they will not hesitate to go through an electric fence. Let's see. When does a queen start to lay after overwintering? It's our queens are probably laying right now in their colonies. They begin probably early February. Up north, it might be a little bit more towards mid-February, but they're laying right now. They're maintaining that brood at 95 degrees. Let's see. That's not good for that. How warm does it need to be for the bees to access a top feeder? They need to be able to break the cluster. The bees form a ball when it gets cold to keep the queen warm, and only when it's warm enough that they can easily move around inside the colony will they start to go up into a feeder. And that's going to happen probably at about 40 degrees. They might not necessarily come out and fly, but they'll sort of loosen up that cluster and begin to move about inside the colony a little bit. All right, we're getting down there, and unfortunately, I'm just going to have to take one more question. I've got another appointment at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to have to scoot. Let me see here. The beginner's kit does not allow upgrades like better protection. You can certainly sort of create your own kit, so to speak, but definitely the greatest bang for the buck will be going with a kit. For those people that maybe want a suit as opposed to just that veil, it's not necessarily the end all of end alls. Most often, what I hear back from people that have gotten the suit and also the veil with their kit are grateful because your neighbors are going to come over, your relatives are going to come over, your friends and family are going to come over, and they're going to want to get into that hive with you. And having an extra piece of headgear comes in handy. And so most people, even though they get a suit or jacket, do enjoy still getting the that veil that comes with a kit. As for the extra supers, our whole approach here is giving people what they need to get started. There's so much personal preference and variation out there that we found it best just to give them give folks what they need to get started, and then once they're up and running and they begin to network a little bit more and begin to learn a little bit more and figure out what works well for them, they've got that flexibility in going with plastic foundation versus wax foundation. Or adding a shallow instead of a medium box, or whatever the case may be, as opposed to sort of locking them in a little bit more by giving them this really robust kit. So our whole approach is giving you what you need to get started and allowing you to sort of adapt your future needs to your own personal style. Folks, I really hope that if you haven't started keeping bees, that you certainly consider it. Now is a wonderful time. Even if you don't start this year, find a local association. Make that connection. Go through the summer helping out a beekeeper. Figure out whether it's for you. Again, I mentioned earlier on that there's a huge difference between sort of hearing about this stuff and actually doing it. And the last thing I would want is for you to go through the expense of getting a bunch of stuff only to get into the hobby and realize, gosh, it's just not really what I thought it was going to be, and it's not really for me. And the only way to know that is to do it, and you don't necessarily have to buy the stuff to do it. Find a local beekeeper. Boy, you know, I've never known a beekeeper to turn away free labor. We love free labor, especially when it comes to harvest time. So get out there, find a local association, go to a meeting. Don't be bashful. Beekeepers, by and large, are a friendly group, and you know, the only hazard is you might not be able to get out of the meeting because they'll talk your ear off because they're so passionate and excited about what they're doing. They will welcome you with open arms. Don't be bashful about it. Get out there, meet some folks, help them out, see if it's for you, and then go from there. I really hope that you found some information here that was useful to you. If you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call. We're here Monday through Friday. We've got email posted on our website. We've got a contact us form. We've got that live chat. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us. Feel free to ask your questions. That's why we're here. Thank you very much. Y'all have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Good night.